Death is difficult, but inevitable. That's why we want to remind you that it doesn't have to be so scary. Our mission is to educate, center, and intrigue you while making tasteful humor along the way. Welcome to another episode of Home is Where the Grave Is. We are your hosts, Dulce.
And I'm Unity. Join us in our journey to better educate ourselves and others in understanding the subject of death and what comes after.
Well, how are you?
I'm good, except for I just completely made that up on the spot. Don't even know where that came from. Went completely off script for no reason.
How's your day going so far then?
It's good. I've just been trying to catch up from the weekend. We did a lot of cleaning, did a lot of catching up. Finally got to a place where we finished the duck pen. The ducks are outside. Whoop, whoop.
You're dumb ducks.
Don't insult my ducks. They're beautiful.
I already did. What are they going to do about
They're
it?
going to come to you in your nightmares and peck your eyes out. That's what they're going to do.
Do it. I tried to mess with some Canadian geese yesterday. Because they are the true illegal immigrants in this country.
Oh my God. I hope they attacked you.
Mm-hmm. They come to this country and they bring their aggressive culture and dare to attack us on our land. How dare they?
Stolen land. Anyway, how was your day?
I woke up late.
That's normal, though. That's not late for you. That's on time.
I know. I know. Exactly. I don't get up at the crack of dawn like you do.
That's right. Wake up at 5 a.m. It's for winners.
Hell no. I'd rather die. On today's topic, that is exactly what we do. We escape in order to avoid death. Because I'd rather be dreaming than be awake at 4 a.m, aka dead.
You've got to stop doing that. How are you relating the episode every single time? It's like the third time in a row.
So, Unity, what is today's episode on?
So, we will be going into escapism and fantasy and how it relates to death.
And we both research and we don't always coordinate. So, this episode has taken some very interesting turns.
You know, it always ends up good in the end and we make it work, so.
So, my research ended up focusing on this virtual platform back in the early 2000s. So obviously for not young kids today or even, what is it? Millennials? I mean, Generation Z.
Yeah. Gen Z.
So because this, I remember going to an exhibit on animation. And somebody had made an entire movie within the platform. And that's what got me interested in this whole thing. Because apparently this platform called Second Life was like its entire world. And the more I looked into it, like it created its own culture. Like people were like creating entirely new like lives for themselves, worlds, relationships, religion, culture. There were embassies opening up places on here.
Good grief.
So like, yeah, this was like, for me, this was the ultimate escape from reality.
That's very
as you'll
fair.
see.
It makes me think a lot of the episode on Black Mirror. There's a couple of episodes actually where they were talking about like virtual reality and how it takes over life. And how people ended up preferring and creating whole lives. It's probably less in depth than how you're about to go into it, but it reminds me of that.
And we'll be talking about good or bad, pros and cons. What is reality? Are we real? Are we in the Matrix? Have we been asleep this entire time?
Are we past the point of judging anymore? I mean, honestly.
As we said, today's episode focuses on something that is just as universal today as it was 3, 4, 500 years ago. And I always like to say that because boomers, they're always like, oh, kids these days, they're so terrible. We were never terrible. Well, excuse you. For as long as humans have existed, they have sought a way to escape reality through fantasy. For instance, one of my favorite books, Don Quixote, the protagonist, an old dude, uses romantic books on chivalry to escape his boring world into one of knights, dragons, and princesses. So even if this book was written, I think, 1600s, even by then, this was like super outdated.
Well, I mean, books were like the first escape methods, right? Because even back in the day, they're like, yeah, you read too many books. You got your nose in a book. You're not living real life.
It was a lot of complaints. People were like, "Oh, these kids are reading books about romanticism. Oh, they're gonna get ideas about things that are not conservative and Christian-like." And then in the early 1900s, something that we talked about before, people used spiritualism to find if there was more to life than the finality of death, and it kind of became its own little world where people started like pretending there were ghosts, like tricking people into believing there were ghosts and that their loved ones had come back from the dead. And then another example that I love to use is after World War II, a still healing Japan, had their entire basically world of life completely destroyed during World War II. They had created this theme park, it was basically supposed to be Disneyland, but Walt Disney hopped out, but they kept the theme park and they called it Dreamland. And apparently this heralded this whole new society for Japan, the way we know it today, an escape into a childlike world of innocence, far from the ravages of war. And you could argue that's kind of where this whole anime kawaii culture started from. And today, with the onset of the internet, people are now able to live their lives completely online, and aka detach themselves completely from reality. And we're not talking about like your mind is on the internet and your body, blah blah blah. We're not Matrix level yet, but it seems like we are getting there.
We are getting there. Virtual reality is constantly evolving and to fantastic links. So,
yes, but is it a positive coping mechanism? Is it a crutch, a hobby, or a dangerous detachment from reality? Well, we will be exploring that in a couple of stories we'll be telling today.
Well said.
So, like I said, in 2003, an online multimedia platform named Second Life was launched, where people could create an avatar, which I had no idea came from Hinduism.
Yes.
I think
they're taking it from the idea of reincarnation, and also it's the gods have multiple avatars that come to the earth in different forms. So it would be similar to, if we're going to equate this to Christianity, Jesus is considered in some areas like he is the Son of God, and then in other areas he is the embodiment of God. So he would essentially kind of be the embodiment or the avatar of God in human form.
Escaping reality by being born on Earth.
Goes both ways. Both ways.
So yeah, I never knew that. And obviously I'm an uneducated person, and I've been watching Avatar: The Last Airbender and that Avatar movie and never got the connections between those two.
Really? Even? Okay.
No, I know.
Do you remember the guru that he went to?
No, I didn't know.
Okay.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know. Now I know. So anyway, this Second Life introduced, we create an avatar and then interact with other users in a user-created content world. Like the whole world was completely generated by the users themselves, and avatars weren't even inhibited by like what you could do. Really?
Your cat says hello.
Okay. Well, like I said, avatars could take any form the users choose. I'm talking like anything: humans, animals, vegetables, minerals, or a combination thereof. and residents could choose to resemble themselves in real life. And it was actually interesting that in Second Life, people weren't always embracing the anonymity that the internet brings. They were actually representing themselves as they were, connecting themselves to their real selves. And they could even be more abstract forms, since every aspect of the avatar was completely customizable. And then in the Second Life, you could also travel any way you wanted to, anything from walking to teleportation. So because of its vastness and ability to customize, there was a culture that was born from the game. Live residents created Second Life residents created live music, theater, competitive entertainment, and anything else you can think of. They had live concerts. They had educational institutions who used the game to educate both teachers and students as a form of a long distance education. For instance, the University of San Martin de Porres of Peru created a prototype of Peruvian archaeological buildings. The West Virginia University Department of Special Education used Second Life widely in education, such as providing teaching certifications and certificates of degree in 7 different distance education programs.
Wow, that is dope. I would have joined that.
And at some point, countries began opening embassies in Second Life. The first was the Maldives, which created a diplomacy island for visitors to talk face-to-face with virtual ambassadors about visas, trade, and other issues. And then I think the one that followed was Sweden. It was a couple of countries that actually ended up opening embassies. Religious organizations also used the platform to create entirely new religions. Apparently Christians had kind of the Passion of the Christ Island, where you could go through each station. But there was a church called the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Second Life that was established in 2006.
Say that
where services
5 times
were
fast.
held. I know, right? And services were regularly held. Imagine I'm going to church and then just hop on your computer.
Good grief.
So and I remember the animation that I saw, the movie, explored different people's stories, and there's one person that had given themselves a wife and a child and everything in Second Life. So I was reading this article in The Atlantic that further explored some of the life stories from Second Life. For instance, an elderly woman shared how her multiple sclerosis. I have it and I don't know how to pronounce it. Okay.
It's
multiple
hard.
Sclerosis had impacted her since she was 20. By the time she was diagnosed at 50, she could barely walk, was housebound, and unemployed. And then something about codes wouldn't allow her to make a wheelchair ramp. She had to keep steps, so she was literally housebound.
That's messed up.
She said, "I was looking at my 4 walls and wondering if there could be more." And thus she found Second Life. Her name was Gentle Heron on there. She was a girl who loved water slides, and she would soon find other people with disabilities of all different sorts in a cross-disability virtual community. And as a community, they explore the world bound by a shared sense of, quote, not being fully included in the world.
Wow. That's really nice.
I think that because that was my first thought with some of what we've seen is the benefits of the internet is people that are unable to be a part of the real world. And that sense of isolation of not being able to interact with it. And so were these people escaping into a fantasy? Well, for Alice, or Gentle Heron, she felt her sense of self feels fully expressed in both reality and in Second Life, instead of one reality being more real than the other. Quote, I live a well-rounded life on SL, which is Second Life. It feeds all my other selves, said another user.
Wow, because I mean, we as humans, we are social creatures. We need community. We need to be able to interact with people. And with there being so many minority groups that are disparaged from being a part of society, this is, like you said, this is part of the good side of the internet.
But I just thought it was so interesting that they didn't feel like one reality was more real than the other. You know, like getting on the computer and then like, I'm going back to my real world. Like they've considered both equal in terms of their lives online and their lives in the real world.
That is really interesting. It's a little bit of a hard concept for me to wrap my brain around. But I mean, of course it's their experience. I'm not denying it. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around it.
And these are like feel good stories. And then, you know, there's some, there's a documentary called Life 2.0 that explores the more gritty side of Second Life. In the documentary, it focused on a anonymous man who spent his nights trolling as an 11-year-old, a hobby that would eventually become an addiction and result in an online killing spree. I wish I knew more details of how do you kill avatars in Second Life, but we'll find another time, I guess. In another story, a man and woman married separately, aka they were married to other people. They fell in love and decided to have a completely virtual affair, despite living several thousand miles away. Certain scenes in the documentary show the couple's strange attempts at cyber sex. Apparently they were into it. As you can, you know, we're thinking Sims, that's probably what it looked like.
So that brings me right back to that episode of Black Mirror, because with that, they enter the virtual reality, but they have advanced so far into virtual reality that you can feel the things your avatar feels. So if you're in a fighting game, you're going to feel the punches, you're going to feel the pain. And then in there, they also explore cyber sex, and they can obviously feel it. So yeah.
I know there's some technology already on that, like long distance technology. So yeah, as we know, not all who wander on the internet have a clear line between reality and the virtual world. So I'm sure that these cheating partners knew very well what they were doing. But and I'm gonna step away from Second Life to talk about an example of how the internet can go bad. A well-known tragedy of the internet is the incel communities, aka involuntary celibate, where mostly men with poor social skills seeking relationship advice enter an echo chamber of victim blaming for their own insecurities. And if you know what I mean by an echo chamber, you know, when you have nothing to combat your ideas and opinions, and it becomes fact for you because it's just a constant stream of people validating how you feel. You know, there's no room to grow. There's no room to actually change your mind.
Yep.
Or learn if what you're thinking is correct. These communities have had real world implications. So like an example of something happening online affecting the real world. In 2014, Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured 14 others before committing suicide. In a YouTube video, he explained he wanted to punish women for rejecting him and sexually active men because he envied them.
Yeah, these incel groups are considered terrorist groups or terrorist threats, domestic terroristic threats. There we go. With the FBI.
But they all mostly start on the internet.
Yep.
In these communities on the internet. On the one hand, you have the wonderful people with disabilities able to actually do something to socialize, and then you have people becoming terrorists on the internet. So it's kind of like the two sides of the same coin. That's a correct metaphor, right?
I think so. Yeah, it fits for the metaphor. It's interesting because speaking on like the incel culture, right? Even to them, there's a more accurate other side of the coin, because what is the Japanese word for shut-ins?
Hikikomori.
There you go. So they are also to that extreme, if not more, but they're not violent and they're not victim blaming themselves. They're not in a victim blaming mode. They're just like, leave me alone. I literally cannot take society because I've not interacted with this for so long that it gives me so much anxiety even thinking about it. So I'm just going to stay here where it's safe.
Right. But in that regard, there must not be in the same communities, because, like, you know, the involuntary celibate blames other people because they are unable to accomplish their own desires, meaning that they do want girlfriends, they want to leave their closed worlds, and instead of figuring out why they haven't been able to fulfill that, they decide to blame everybody else.
We're getting into philosophy. I like it.
What's interesting to me is another aspect of people that are completely detaching themselves from reality are, you know, all of these conspiracy groups that are coming out now. And they're basically completely being formed on the internet. You know, we had the flat earthers. We had the people that believe that Jews control the world. We have the QAnons that are completely online, completely based on anonymity, or the original is completely based on anonymity. And then everybody else is able to bring those ideas created online into the real world.
Can we?
Into politics.
Not to get too deep into QAnon, but what the heck are they? What are they? Are they right-wing, left-wing? I hear about it, but I never understand what they are.
Right-wing. Far right-wing.
Far right-wing. Okay, so extremist.
Yeah, extremist. And I remember an article that they had some idea of who could be behind it. And turned out there was like completely ordinary people. That it's always these completely ordinary people that are completely socially isolated, the ones that start coming with all these crazy ideas. But they've had such a huge impact in the world that you now have politicians and other prominent speakers repeating the same nonsense.
Creating those echo chambers that you were talking about.
Yep. And it is absolutely horrifying. Like, everything that good that comes from the internet, it's equally bad. It is also coming out. You kind of get to the point like, should we ever have allowed the internet to come to fruition if we knew all this was going to come out later?
You know, it's funny though. I know everybody gets freaked out with it, but I think it's a matter of slowing down production more than anything. So it's always good that we evolve as a populace, as a society, but you cannot develop so far ahead that you don't have a countermeasure for that. Meaning, like with this whole instance that's coming up with the ChatGPT, the AIs, the more advancements that come with that. There's a lot of fear and a lot of scarcity that's spreading for good reason, because if you don't have a way to shut it down, if it gets out of hand, then it's essentially like having a Superman without, plutonium? Without having his weakness. You have to have a weakness for everything. You have to be able to have a countermeasure for it.
Yes, and obviously, the internet came so quickly that we never really learned, or our earlier generations didn't learn how to cope with it. When you have such an influx of information and there's no indication on what is true and what is false, then people that have never been told otherwise, that something that they are seeing may not be true, or believe it, you know?
That's very true.
Why we have so many elderly people falling for scams. But literally, if you really truly pay attention, like I'm on Reddit a lot, a huge majority of those videos, people can put any information that they want with it, make up any story, and who are you to say it's false? It's a terrifying idea, because you forget. You're scrolling through and you're just wanting to have fun. somebody says, look at this girl being a Karen because this guy was just trying to do something. And then the reality was this guy was actually, like the video, this guy was actually trying to steal her bike.
I was thinking about the
that
one
she already paid for.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and she was pregnant and she was a nurse. And this guy was like, you know, all you have to do is edit a footage or manipulate it, and you can tell any story you want and completely ruin somebody's life.
That's sad. That's really sad.
It's horrifying.
Yeah. Your story reminded me of another one that just recently happened, of this woman on an airplane. I forgot the specifics, but you can obviously look it up. It's pretty fresh within the last couple of weeks. People kept thinking she was drunk. She was on vacation and she was freaking out because she's like, this guy, he's not real. He's not real. And they're like, what do you know what I mean? She wasn't meeting people's expectations of a coherent like explanation of what was going on. So, but the reality of it was the dude did turn to her and explain that he was going to take over the plane and there was a bomb threat, supposedly, according to authorities. So I was like, okay, that's... But the way they shot the footage initially of just showing her like acting that way, it made her look like she was crazy.
Wow.
But yeah. But it
and on the
oh, go ahead.
So like, yeah, it's just we're only just now teaching children how to distinguish fiction from reality on the internet. You know, like basically how to know when something is propaganda, when someone's purposely targeting something towards a certain group because they're trying to influence the way they think without presenting facts, and how to be able to know when somebody's trying to do that.
True. Yeah, because they need to be, future generations need to be, and even current generations need to be equipped with the tools, like you said, to be able to navigate this world, because it's our reality.
But older generations didn't learn that. Whereas I feel like our generation figured that out because we were before the internet and after the internet. So we were able to have some sense of detachment from the virtual reality of the internet and experience life in the real world before everything became virtual, you know.
Yeah.
Like kids today, you're seeing like videos of, there's this one girl that was like absolutely losing her mind and like becoming physically aggressive because somebody was trying to take her phone from her. And then you have all these kids that are either hurting themselves or others over TikTok trends. And that's definitely an example of being unable to distinguish reality from fiction.
Yeah. So I guess that brings us into the conversation of, when is fantasy become escapism versus like we were talking about before, where it's just a part of your life. It's an additive to your life rather than a method of escape, because escape is more of the unhealthy coping mechanism that it turns into.
Unfortunately, there is no separating the two, really. Your life is on the internet now, and you just have to learn how to balance the two.
Yeah.
Cope with it.
Yeah. Because it provides such a, how do you explain this? It provides such an alluring out or relief from our day-to-day life, right? Because like we were talking about in the earlier stories, these were people that weren't accepted in their communities in real life. So they formed their own community rather than in person. They did it online. Maybe because they had abilities that wouldn't allow them to be able to go out and find their own communities in person, whatever the case is.
It's impossible to completely detach yourself from the internet unless you live a hermit in the woods. But still, cameras can see you from outer space. You have to have an email. You have to have a phone number and an address. That's public information. You can find that on the internet. You don't have to have social media site, but that's how businesses and job prospects are going to be looking to be able to figure out what kind of person you are. If you have none, I think they would be a little weirded out by that.
True. Very true. And that has become a new social norm. People are weirded out if others go off the net, as they say, or go off the web. And they're like, why don't they have any social medias? What's wrong with them? Are they a serial killer? Like, what's going on behind?
Yeah. Didn't you just see the story of a family that tried to live out in the woods and died? They found their like mummified remains because obviously you watched some YouTube videos and thought they could do it and didn't, obviously.
Well, that's terrifying. But, I remember. So what I was trying to explain was that fantasy does provide an out from all of our stressors, pains, and realities in real life where, I mean, the real world itself is just a constant either warfare, economic distress, social distress. With the internet being what it is, it's become difficult for, I think, older generations, especially our government, to be able to hide things. Not saying that they can't completely hide things. It's still possible to control, but people are more aware and they're seeing things for what they are, and the level of trust within the top down, going from government to, your state, to your communities, to your neighbor, like the level of trust is almost non-existent. So it makes reality more painful. And not to mention like the simple days when you were just really afraid of death, and people wanted to escape from that. So I don't know. I think that's where, go ahead.
And I would argue that some people have sort of escaped death on the internet. There was this, I remember this incident where somebody loved the game and had died of a terminal illness, and the game put their avatar in the game, perpetually allowing them to continue to exist even in the after death.
Oh my gosh, that's so good, because I mean, good or bad, it still allows his loved ones to interact in a way, have a piece of them. That's an interesting memorialization. But
and then the multiple people with chronic illnesses documenting their journeys online on their blogs and allowing the world to see this very vulnerable side of them. And then you learning that they died of this, and their blog continuing to stay up on the internet for you to be able to continue to reread words from a person that is no longer with us.
That's impactful. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is very impactful. Yeah, it reminds me of that scene from V for Vendetta. Do you remember that?
I haven't seen that movie in so long.
Oh, you need to. It's so good. So the scene where, can I remember characters' names? Absolutely not. But the main female protagonist. So she is going through this situation of imprisonment, where she thinks it's very real, and all she has to cling on to are the notes from her neighboring cell. Turns out it's all fabricated, but the point of it that it really clarifies or shines a light on is we need each other as a species, especially in our most difficult times. So being able to hear from someone or talk to someone that goes through the same experiences provides a shared bond unlike any other. So they're still helping people.
So Uditi, tell us a little bit about coping mechanisms.
So yes, we did talk about that a lot, about, well, when does fantasy borderline into escapism and becomes an unhealthy coping mechanism? So as described, escapism and fantasy are psychological mechanisms that people use to cope with various aspects of life, including the concept of death. They offer an escape from the harsh realities and challenges of existence by creating alternative worlds, narratives, or experience that provide comfort, excitement, and a sense of control. Now, that isn't to say that we're shining a negative light and all fantasy is an escapism or a coping mechanism. As we were talking about before, there is a borderline We just haven't quite found it yet. If you do, let us know.
And write a book about it.
Write a book about it so we can talk about it. But let's go through some of these categories. So coping with mortality. The inevitability of death is a fundamental aspect of our human existence, right? But it can be overwhelming and frightening to contemplate. And escapism and fantasy can help cope with that. By diverting attention from fear and mortality, engaging in fictional worlds and scenarios can temporarily alleviate the anxiety surrounding the unknown, allowing individuals to explore their emotions indirectly, which is kind of a way of therapy. Gives people a sense of control. I mean, shoot, think about it in real life. We feel out of control all the time. And I personally, being a person that really relies, I don't know how much of a control freak I actually am, but I'm sure I'm somewhere on there. But having a constant lack of control it feels like death. It really feels like you're losing everything. You have nothing to make you feel better, to make you feel grounded, I would explain. So for my coping mechanism, it has to do with like, okay, what are the small things I can deal with? Okay, I couldn't deal with this big issue with my boss. Let me go home and clean my house because controlling the clutter that is around me is the one thing I can control. That type of situation. But people find a greater purpose in like these type of scenarios where they can have full reign of their entire lives without someone else bigger than them dictating their lives.
Reminds me of those doomsday people that think the world is ending, so it's okay to live in terrible conditions. Like I saw a woman that's like was a hoarder, and she believed like there was no point in doing anything because the world was going to end.
You know, as sad as that is incredibly relatable. And I think to a lot of us that get to that place, it's not constant, but you're right. It's that place of just like, what's the point? It feels pointless. So going on to that, finding meaning and purpose in life. So when you've hit that low bottom, now you've got to, now you need to fight for a purpose. What is my purpose? I feel like that's been mankind's question from the start of existence. Like, what is the point of me being here? What am I supposed to do? But I did find somewhere. Oh, go ahead.
When you hit bottom, you can only go up.
Cookie cutter sayings. But it's true. I mean, you can only go so far down, right? I would also say with finding a purpose, I think that's one of the things that also bothered me for a long time on personal accounts. And funny enough, with Disney and Pixar, with a lot of their stuff and their characters, they question that a lot of the times. And what comes out of it is like, the one I most resonate with is like, the purpose of life is what you make it. So there is no purpose. Deal with it. Come to accept that, but then create your own reality, because it's not a real reality anyway. It's fine.
I'm pretty sure somebody's going to take that and misconstrue it and do something complete.
So, okay, disclaimer. There are still consequences. You're not free of consequences of the choices you make in life. Never free of consequences. That's one of the biggest things I think that's wrong with our nation and the world, honestly. Let me go on my preaching bench here. But people think, well, I have the freedom of choice and that's great, but nobody wants to talk about the consequences. Make whatever choice you want. You still got those consequences coming at you.
Well, do those consequences affect them? Or do they affect everybody else, but not them?
Inevitably, they always affect the person that is causing it.
Not if they die before global warming comes around and kills us all.
Now we're just getting into hypotheticals. But so the next part is escapism from pain and suffering. That's an obvious, right? You have a constant loss and grief that you have to sustain in this lifetime. And sometimes those are really hard, strong feelings that are feeling like they're never ending. They're just waves and waves that keep dragging you down. And you need a way to get out from under that wave just to breathe. Well, fantasy or escapism methods can come into that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you have the good old existential crisis, which I feel like our generation and other generations have been in since the beginning.
We were born and then we said, why?
You know, it's funny you bring that up. I've been saying, but why? But why? Since I was like 4. But I feel like that's not a unique thing. That's shared amongst kids anyway. They're going to ask why a billion times. So, however, we've talked about all these things. It is essential to strike a balance between escapism and facing reality and having fantasy. Because as long as you're not using it as a coping mechanism that hurts you, hurts your mental health, hurts others, hurts your physical health, what's wrong with fantasy?
Do whatever the hell you want.
What's wrong with it? So yeah, that's my takeaway on it. I think a lot of there were some good quotes that I found. So there's a Hindu proverb that says, "Even nectar is poison if taken in excess," which comes from the famous societal quote. And I say societal quote because it's not the exact one. It's too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So moderation.
True. There is such thing as too much money.
There is.
Too much air.
Too much air, too much water. Yeah.
What is something that you can't have enough of?
I have not been able... Wait. Are you saying something I can't have enough of, but won't be harmed by?
Yeah.
I haven't been able to come up with one yet. I've been thinking about that since I learned that phrase, and I'm like, I can't find anything.
What about books?
Well, here's the down spiral of that. So if you read too many books and that's all your time is occupied with, then your muscles atrophy because you're not moving anywhere. You're not going out to work and earn money for yourself to feed yourself, or you're not homebound to then create
You're not
farms.
reading them. You're not reading them. You're just collecting them. Well, and you don't have to have physical copies. You can have them all on your little nook.
Running out of space. Constantly running out of space and then having to spend a bunch of money on bigger hard drives and space, which then turns you into a hoarder because you're running out of space.
What about trees? Can you have too many trees?
Yes, because you can't survive in it. Wildlife wouldn't be able to survive in it.
Lies. No, you can't survive with trees.
So anyway, away from that debate, we could debate that all day long. So here are some examples of like healthy coping mechanisms, right? We were talking about reading books. Reading books are a great thing. Listening to music, exercising. These are just some of the few things that get you up and moving and doesn't hurt you. And fantasy play, like we were talking about before, and these new virtual realities is also a good coping mechanism if you need that.
Or you can argue that these virtual realities and the internet is just the platform. And then from there, you need to form healthy habits and coping mechanisms.
Ooh. So if you have a bunch of people that don't already have those capabilities and help build this world, they're just replicating the world that exists in reality.
Well, yeah, but yeah, so like think of like Second Life is simply a space that you happen to be in. And then from there, you can decide whether what you're doing here is healthy or not. You know, it's like you're in a building. You decide if you're going to be something good or you're going to burn the building down.
Which feeds right back into giving the person, the one that's interacting, the sense of control, because they have control of their reality to make these type of choices, big choices.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. Something else that...
So what's our takeaway?
So I think our takeaway is going to be fantasy is good. It's not bad. It offers people healthy ways to cope and maneuver within a world that they have more control over. But there is a double-edged sword to that, depending on the individual, of course, and depending on their level of toxicity and their lack of Coping mechanism abilities, healthy coping mechanism abilities.
And this is coming from the girl that plays D&D games that last week's.
That is a fantastic example. So one of the things that we always say is that no matter who you are or who you try to present in real life, no matter how hard you even try to hide it, that inner self will come out when you start playing those characters, because it's really, really hard for human nature to pretend to be something that they're not. Their true selves will come out every single time. And it's weird seeing it. And you're like, ooh, didn't realize you were a full-fledged sexist or racist. Here we go. You got mommy issues? Damn. It's showing, my guy.
You work with kids in real life? Oh. Oh goodness.
Oh God. No. But yeah, that's those are my interesting takeaways. And it's always I always encourage people, especially with coping mechanisms, if you weren't taught healthy coping mechanisms or you don't know how to handle your own big emotions, there are a lot of helpful resources out there. A lot of the ones
you can still learn.
You can still learn. There are a lot of books. Therapy has boomed in the last 10 years to the point where you have people come on the internet and be like, hey, let's talk about this random issue. And then everybody else is like, I relate to that. I never knew that was a term.
Woo. That's why our mission is to bring you the material and immaterial resources to help soothe some of your fears and grief.
Don't forget to follow along for a new episode every Monday on all major podcast platforms, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more, to include YouTube. Watch our videos as they come out a week after the podcast episode comes out. If you do enjoy listening, please hit that subscribe button and don't forget that notification bell on YouTube. If you have questions or want to pique your morbid curiosity, then visit our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Even email us at sweetprogressinc@gmail.com. Don't forget to get that merch on your way out at Delicate Death, our Etsy shop. Until next time, stay alive.
Stay alive. Sort of. We almost got it.